The scene in Archangel in The scene in Archangel in September 1918 is almost cinematic. While crowds in Europe cheer the news of an armistice and the end of the First World War, transports bearing men of the 339th Infantry Regiment slip up the White Sea and dock in a city scraped out of the Arctic wilderness. These soldiers had trained at Fort Custer, Michigan, expecting to fight in the trenches of France. They were Midwestern farmhands and factory workers who discovered only weeks before deployment that they were instead bound for Russia to join a British-led expedition that even its commanders could not fully explain. The warehouses of Archangel and Murmansk held more than 100,000 rifles and mountains of Allied munitions that risked falling into the hands of either German raiders or Bolshevik revolutionaries. Securing those supplies and reopening the Eastern Front became the official purpose of the mission, but whispers in London and Paris hinted at hopes of toppling the new Soviet regime or at least stopping the flow of German divisions westward. By the time the convoy steamed up the estuary, the British had already taken the port and the Bolsheviks had carried away many of the stores, leaving the Americans to fight for reasons that seemed to vanish as soon as their boots hit the frozen dock. Yet these men marched ashore willingly, were issued Russian Mosin Nagant rifles because ammunition for their Enfields was scarce, and swore to do their duty under whatever circumstances awaited them in this bleak corner of the world. In that moment, a story of endurance and improbable courage began, a story that would later earn these soldiers the nickname Polar Bears. The force, never numbering more than 6,000 Americans, consisted of the 339th Infantry Regiment, a battalion of the 310th Engineers, and the 337th Field Hospital and Ambulance Companies, augmented later by railroad troops from the Transportation Corps. Many of them were draftees, others were volunteers who believed they were helping to finish the war they had been called up to fight. They arrived in Archangel accompanied by influenza, which claimed more than 100 lives on the voyage or shortly after debarkation, and were folded into an international force that included British, French, Canadian, and Italian units, as well as reluctant white Russian soldiers who were supposed to fight their compatriots in the Red Army. The intervention's strategic logic was muddled from the start. Allied planners envisioned thrusts along rivers and railways toward the interior, south along the Dvina and Vaga rivers toward Kotlas and Vologda, east along the Emtsa, west to the port of Onega, and down the Murmansk Railroad, where they hoped to rendezvous with anti-Bolshevik forces and spark a wider revolt. The Americans found themselves spread across this vast forested region, manning blockhouses and small garrisons in hamlets that would become household names to them: Seltso, Tulgas, Ust-Padenga, Shenkursk, Kodish, Obozerskaya, and Bolshie Ozerki. In late September and October, they fought skirmishes on the railroad and at Kodish. Company B clashed with Bolshevik forces at Seltso and Tulgas, losing men and then withdrawing northward as temperatures plunged to 50 degrees below zero, while Company A took up what would prove to be the most exposed position on the Vaga River near Ust-Padenga. It quickly became clear that there would be no quick advance to Kotlas or Vologda, only a brutal winter of patrols, ambushes, and attacks by an enemy who blended into the population and moved effortlessly on skis. Armistice Day in Europe, November 11th, 1918, is marked on the Polar Bear Expedition's timeline by the Battle of Tulgas. As bells rang in Paris and London, American and Canadian soldiers crouched in log blockhouses along the Dvina River, enduring an hours-long artillery barrage before a rush of bayonet-wielding Bolsheviks fell on their positions. Canadian gunners saved the Americans from being overwhelmed, firing at point-blank range to shred the attackers, and Lieutenant John Cudahy led a countercharge that drove the Bolos, as the soldiers called their adversaries, back from the wire. In the months that followed, small engagements flared across the region. At Kodish on the Emtsa River, Combined Allied forces attacked villages held by Bolshevik troops, taking and losing ground in a frozen maze of forest and bog. On the rail front south of Archangel, the 3rd Battalion of the 339th fought its way barely 20 miles toward Obozerskaya, through swamp and scrub before being pinned down by gathering Red Army units. Casualties mounted, weapons jammed in the cold, and trucks froze in place. The temperature at some posts dipped to 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, and diaries spoke of rifles that cracked if mishandled and men whose fingers bled through wool gloves. At the same time, a creeping malaise set in. The men knew that the war against Germany was over, and they increasing.